This video is going to discuss solving quadratics using the square root method. This is definitely the easiest method to do if you want to solve a quadratic, but there are only a couple situations where you want to use it. You want to use it when you have an x squared term, that makes it a quadratic. When you have constants, that means just numbers, and no x terms. That's called our linear term. No x terms. So if I have my standard form of a quadratic, which is ax squared plus bx plus c, we want to use the square root method when there's no x term. Then it's going to be a pretty quick process. And the steps for that process are to box or highlight what is being squared. That's going to usually be the x squared. So you're going to box that up, or you'll have something in parentheses being squared, and then you want to put the box around that parentheses squared. Then your goal is to get the box alone. You're going to do plus or minus the square root of both sides. This plus or minus is the main place I see people make a mistake. You're going to simplify the square root like previous video, and then if you were starting with the thing with parentheses squared, then you're going to need to have one more step of solving for x. So let's see what this works out to be in problems. So my first thing I notice, I don't have any x terms in this problem. I only have x squareds and constants. So I'm going to box up my x squared term, and I'm going to get it by itself. I'm basically going to pretend, you don't need to write this, but I'm going to pretend I'm going to call that box a b. I call it the blob method. So if I had this equation right here, 3 plus 1 equals 13, you know how to solve that equation because you've been doing it for a while. We're going to treat this problem exactly the same for a moment. So if I need to get that red box by itself, I am going to subtract 1 on both sides, and you're going to do it. So 3x squared equals 12. Find your x squared again and box that up. Now I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. So I get x squared equals 12 divided by 3 is 4. And now I'm going to do the square root of both sides, but don't forget to put a plus or minus. So this means my answer is going to be plus or minus, simplify the square root of 2. What that means is if I plug in positive 2 to my original equation, it works, and if I plug in negative 2 to my original equation, it works. The next one you freak out because you have OMG fraction. Let's start the same way. Box up your x squared. Since the whole left side is a fraction, I'm going to get rid of it by multiplying by the denominator. So that leaves me with the numerator, the top, 3x squared plus 2 equals 2 times 4, which is 8. And now it should look pretty much like the one before. We're going to minus the 2. Once again, I don't need to see all your work if you're at the place where you can just do this in your head. 3x squared equals 6. Now I can divide by 3. And I'm going to come over here. So x squared equals 2. And I'm going to do plus or minus the square root. That was a horrible square root. Beep. Plus or minus the square root on both sides. And there's nothing I can do with the square root of 2, so my answer is just x equals plus or minus the square root of 2. Which means if I plug in positive square root of 2, I get the right answer. Negative square root of 2, I get the right answer. This next one looks a little bit longer, and what you want to do is think about combining like terms first. But they're on opposite sides, so I'm going to move my x squared terms first versus my constant. Because sometimes, just like solving a normal equation, you get in a dark place when you are when you are trying to move your constants first. So my life advice, take it or leave it, is to move your variables first. And now I'm back to the same type of problem. So my goal is to get this basically to start looking like a two-step equation. Minus 2 from both sides. Box it up. Divide by 2. So x squared equals 8. Do the square root. Don't forget your plus or minus. So x is going to equal plus or minus. And then I need to do my factor tree method from the previous video, or be looking for perfect squares. So I'm doing 8 is 4 times 2, which breaks down to 2 times 2 times 2. So I can take out one pair of 2's, and then I have 1 2 left under my square root. And if you do a lot of these problems, then you'll get used to the square root of 8 is 2 square root 2. So you won't even have to spend a lot of time thinking about that. Oops, I skipped one. Used too much of my space. I put this one in for a specific reason. What's my only step to get x squared by itself? I just need to minus 36 from both sides. But I did want to talk about this one because when we do the square root, plus or minus, I'm going to get an I in this answer. So anytime I have a negative under the square root, I'm going to take out an I, and then I simplify my square root like normal, so the square root of 36 is 6. So my final answer for that one is plus or minus 6i. If I look at the next one, do you see how here I have a x term? We're going to cross that out. We don't want to use this method if there's an x term. Don't use this method. Later we're going to learn about solving by completing the square, which is effectively how to take something that doesn't look like this square root method and turn it into the square root method. But we're not doing that today. So for now we're going to say don't use that method. The next one has an OMG fraction too, but the whole side is not a fraction, so what I need to do first is actually move this 3. Don't bother the fraction unless it's the whole side. You with me? 13. Now the fraction's the whole side, so I'm going to multiply by 2. And I'm actually going to multiply by negative 2 to go ahead and get that out of my way. I'm just going to double check I wrote down this problem correctly. Dun, da, 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 which I did. Okay, just seemed like weird numbers. Not that numbers can't be weird. So x squared equals negative 26. Then we're going to do what? The square root. Don't forget your plus or minus. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 26, and I'm going to take out that negative as an I. Now, I in my infinite wisdom know I can't simplify this farther, but you may not have that infinite wisdom yet. If you try to down 26, you get 2 times 13. Don't have any pairs of the same factors, so that is as simplified as I can get. To the back now, these ones get a little bit more complicated, but overall we're going to treat them the same. I left some other ones on the inside for you to try on your own, so make sure to try those before you submit your your pictures for this video. But we'll do these last 2 harder ones on the back. So your goal, once again, we're thinking about this as 2 blob plus 3 equals 11. Think about the 2 steps you would do to solve that equation. You would minus 3 and divide by 2. We're going to do the same exact steps. Don't start trying to do some sort of distribution nonsense. Okay, so my first step is going to be to subtract 3, which would be 8, blob it again, and now we're going to divide by 2. So x minus 1 squared equals 8 divided by 2 is 4. Now I have my whole quantity on the left is being squared, so I'm going to do the square root to undo it. Plus or minus. So the left is now x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2. Cover up the right side in your head. Usually if you had x minus 1, you would add 1 to both sides. So that's what we're actually going to do. We're going to do 1 plus or minus 2. And if we haven't talked about it yet, what the plus or minus means is that you're going to literally do the plus and then literally do the minus. So 1 plus 2 would be 3. 1 minus 2 would be negative 1. So those are my two solutions. Looking at the last problem, blob it, box it up. What would be my normal way to solve that? I would add 4. So 3x plus 2 squared equals 24. Divide by 3. I forgot my blob, sorry. Then x plus 2 squared equals 8. Now the whole left side is being squared, so I can undo that with a square root. Don't forget your plus or minus. The number of times you're going to hear me do that over the next 2 weeks is a lot. Now we need to simplify square root of 8, which is going to end up breaking down to 2 times 2 times 2. So I get x plus 2 equals plus or minus 2 square root 2. Last thing, imagine covering up the right side of the equation. How would you usually get rid of x plus 2? You would minus 2. So we're going to get that x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root 2. Now notice I put that in the front. That was for a reason. We usually put that number to start off, whatever it is that you've moved over from x. The plus or minus we like to be in the middle. That's it. Make sure that you finish any of the problems I did not go over and submit those as part of your assignment.